there is a great deal of disquiet in the education and teaching sectors as reforms that were clearly signalled by Erica Stanford when she was in opposition. She is, in actual fact, implementing as the new Minister of Education. There hasn't been a great clamour, it has to be said, from parents or communities, I think, who would generally be supportive of the areas in which she's moving. Having a coordinated curriculum across New Zealand, it's extraordinary that the Education Review Office mentioned that too. It's one of their criticisms. But she's also moving towards having some form of universal testing, particularly for years 3 to 10 is the idea at the moment. And that there is, and to replace two relatively formal, but not necessarily, as the Education Review Office pointed out, nationally implemented testing regimes called EASTL and PAT. The new head of the Auckland Primary School Principals Association, Lucy Naylor, will have some views on this and other issues in her sector. And she joins us now. Lucy, thank you so much for joining us and congratulations upon your new position.
Oh, thank you. Kia ora.
What are you the principal of? What school?
I'm the principal at Milford School on Auckland's North Shore.
Okay. So most of the culture of most of your kids, well, it must be a smattering of everything, would it?
Yeah, it's fairly mixed. It's probably quite representative of Auckland as a whole. A high proportion of Chinese and Korean students. But yeah, a real mixed bag, but it's a great community. So I'm very lucky to work there.
Lots of South Africans?
Oh, not so many. They're probably a bit further up the northern bays.
Ah, okay. Gosh, for a wee while there, I used to go to North Shore, and I could swear I was in downtown Joburg.
Yeah.
Now, just on the accents. Listen, Lucy, you've taken over from Kyle Brewerton as the head of the Auckland Primary Principals Association, and thank you for joining us. Listen, the Education Review Office last year was scathing of the way in which children in this country are tested to ensure that teachers are aware that they are actually learning what they're being taught, and of the communications from schools in general to parents as well as to how children are progressing. I imagine you're aware of that report. Was that fair commentary, do you think?
Yeah, look, there's definitely things that we need to address as an education system. But around, in terms of the tools and the assessment platforms that have been in the media in the last 24 hours, look, Auckland's a very diverse community. So I know that opinions are going to be very, very varied. But a few weeks ago, the Minister did flag to the Auckland principals that the assessment request for tender for the assessment platform would be going out. It's also been spoken about I believe, by the Minister at a beginning principal, Hui, in the Hawke's Bay. It's also been right from the get-go, it's been one of the Minister's 6 priorities and very clear in her strategic intentions that it was coming. I guess the piece that possibly is missing is that it hasn't been explicitly shared with the sector. So there is inconsistency around the messaging around that, which I think is what has been heard in the media in the last few days.
Well, I'm reading Radio New Zealand reports on it, which I think is where the story broke in particular. And you'd read and you'd go, gosh, teachers are up in arms about there being a single national assessment system. But that is not correct.
I think, look, again, opinions are very varied, but I do think it's worth mentioning as well that teachers have to assess to teach. You can't teach unless you're assessing.
Totally agree.
And there are some really good assessment practices already out there, and as you've already mentioned, we've been using PATs and EASTL effectively for years. The assessment tools are a very small part of how teachers assess. Every day they're making observations, looking at anecdotal data they have, having conversations with the students. There's 1,001 ways that teachers make an overall teacher judgment about how children are progressing. So I just want to be very clear that what you're seeing in terms of the tool is a small part of a teacher's job, and we have been doing it effectively for a number of years. Again, what the current tools like PAT and EASTL don't give us, or it doesn't give the minister or the ministry, the sight that they need to effectively resource and fiscally plan for education for the future. So while those tools inform teaching and learning on a daily basis, they don't give the big picture view that the ministry and the minister need to plan for a better education for all of our tamariki.
Okay.
So,
And so the argument is that because they aren't uniformly applied as well, that's the other issue
yes,
here too.
yeah.
Because the Education Review Office said last year that national tests like PAT and EASTL were critical in their assessment, but only half of schools were using them. That's extraordinary. If you're not using PAT and EASTL, what are you using?
Well, there's a whole suite of assessment tools, and I do think consistency with assessment tools is definitely a need. But on top of PATs and EASTL, you've got gloss testing for maths, you've got running records, you've got a whole load of assessment tools. But again, the variability between what schools are using will, how the teachers are using those to inform and make their decisions. So there is a variance between schools. And again, I thought the minister's been pretty clear that this is also around gaining consistency and a consistent quality assessment practice across all of New Zealand for all of our children. And in order to do that, there does need to be a proportion of uniformity. There is a risk, and again, this has been hit the media yesterday, I think, but there is a risk around what we don't want is we don't want league tables. League tables are going to do nothing to improve
They're
the
inevitable.
outcome.
Yeah, you're good luck. It's sort of that's King Canute stuff. They are going to happen.
Definitely, yeah.
Because
it's
you're going to get access
not the
to each of
intention.
the schools' tests under the Official Information Act, and media will do that even if they're not published officially by the ministry. The media will do it for you, as they do with secondary schools, the NCA and the like.
It's absolutely. My understanding is absolutely not the intention of the. So the request for the tender is for the platform. So there's two parts to that. There's the platform that they'll use, which is out for tender. There's the adapted content as well. And my understanding is that the content that will be adapted will be used primarily to inform teaching and learning. But yes, there is a risk, definitely, with that.
So what's the problem with that, though? I don't get that. I mean, I'll give you an example. It happens at secondary schools at the moment. NCA results in particular end up, as I said, with the media getting the Official Information Act and publishing that particular information. If they do it already for secondary schools? It's been going for years now, decades. Why wouldn't you use it for primary schools as well?
It creates unnecessary competition between schools, and it's not benefiting our children.
Yeah, but come on, competition between schools is it happens everywhere. You're in Auckland. Schools are competing for role, particularly secondary schools, and people are trying to. I mean, isn't that the nature of life, that we are in competition with each other?
Yeah, to a point. I mean, in CEA is where the league tables are in secondary. In primary, there's a huge amount of variability between every single child that comes into a primary school.
I accept that. Yep.
We've seen an increase of neurodiversity. So, for example, if you are a school who, by geographical location, for example, has a high number of neurodiverse children, then your league tables aren't going to look as good as a school down the road that proportionately has less neurodiverse students. And that's not a fair assessment of the effectiveness of the school. That school with the greater proportion of neurodiverse students, they may well be doing a cracking job and moving those children along, and those children are progressing. But that's not going to reflect when you start comparing schools.
I think that's a straw man argument, really, isn't it? To try and stop national standardised testing, that you're worried about a league table. I mean, the issue really here is, carry on.
Oh, no, I was going to say, so my understanding is the platform is, it's more around an overall teacher judgment. So it's not a national test per se. It'll be an assessment against the new curriculum. So it's not a test that the children are going to sit down and do twice a year. It's a much broader assessment that is a lot more holistic, and it's against the new curriculum, which I think is really, really key.
That's it, but that's a bit of a concern for me because I don't trust teachers on an individual basis necessarily to be the best arbiters of that. If you don't have some form of national standardised testing, I'll explain why.
But we do, yeah.
But the reason is because there is a subjective appreciation that a teacher brings that at least a test objectively measures what a child's learned and what a child hasn't learned against the curriculum. You start putting a subjective view in instead of that, and you'll end up with that dreadful system that we had of national standards before, where you've got one teacher saying this child is learning at a superior rate, and the next teacher, given the same child, would say, well, they're average. There is no standard or uniform mechanism by which to determine where that child really was. It was a subjective evaluation by a school teacher. There are some shocking teachers out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Teachers are on a continuum. But I think that comes down, your point about trusting teachers is a very interesting one and probably a subject for another day. But we've always used standardised testing. And
that's a yes to Pat test, yeah?
Yeah, and others like, as I said before. So that's always been there.